Thank you all for joining us for the Difficult Conversations and Conflict Resolution Workshop. Joining us today are Rick Arpin, Office Managing Partner, Las Vegas for KPMG LLP, Lisa Danielson, Director for the Center for Space and Earth Science at the National Security Education Center in Los Alamos National Lab, Tichelle Lawson, President for FIG Strategy and Consulting, and Casey Lorenzen, Coles Coach for US Bank. Today we're going to discuss common challenges encountered between individuals in a variety of environments, some negotiation strategies, consensus building techniques, and approaches to problem solving in order to help cultivate strong and healthy professional relationships. So we're going to go ahead and start with the panelists introducing themselves, and then we're just going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So Casey, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, I am Casey Lorenzen. I'm out here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Good old high of 7 today, so we're trying to stay warm, but it's okay. We'll get through it. It'll get warm soon, and we'll thaw out. So I am a U.S. Bank goals coach, but previously for 14 years, I have been a high school and junior high PE health teacher and a leadership teacher. So these topics are really fun for me, and I'm excited to dig in and hear what everyone's questions are, and hopefully somebody can take something away and use it in their real life. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for having me.
Tichelle?
I was going to say it was cold here, but I will not say a word about the 52 degrees I think it was here today. My name is Tichelle Lawson. I'm the president of FIG Strategy and Consulting. I am a Las Vegas native, born and raised, first generation. And I'm really looking forward to contributing today. FIG Strategy and Consulting, we do diversity, equity, and inclusion business strategy. So needless to say, we facilitate quite a few difficult conversations, getting people to kind of lean into their bias, address some past hurts, and just kind of embrace uncomfortable conversations. Plus, I'm just a huge advocate for leadership and responsibility, and the responsibility of being able to address challenges with both sensitivity and authority. So definitely looking forward to contributing today.
Thank you. Lisa?
All right. Thanks, Nev. Good evening, everyone. I am Lisa Danielson. As Nev said, I'm the director for the Center for Space and Earth Sciences at Los Alamos National Laboratory. It's one of 6 strategic centers that is tasked with basically building community and reaching out across the laboratory for people in different disciplines to connect and help foster better science, technology development, and so on. I am also a program manager. It's the 2 hats that I wear, my second job. So I am the program manager for Discovery Science and New Missions, which means I also lead a portfolio of work that's mostly related to NASA, but also NSF, other government agencies, some industry collaborations as well. So I have different roles in leadership. I've been in leadership and management for a long time now, and have done many things both as a mentor and a mentee in terms of training and understanding how to navigate all of the wonders of the complexity that come with being a human being in the world and leading people. So I'm actually looking forward to learning from Tichelle now. So this is one of my favorite parts of the panel, is meeting these cool people and learning new things. So thank you.
Thank you. And Rick?
Hi, everyone. Rick Arpin. As mentioned, I work for KPMG. I'm a partner with the firm. We're just one of the large accounting consulting firms, and I lead our Las Vegas office and our gaming practice across the U.S. Like Tichelle, I'm a native of Las Vegas, born and raised. So and I have a lot of experience building teams. I worked in the gaming industry for a long time in quite a few different roles, and so I can lend some of that expertise here. And I'll definitely be learning from others. The uncomfortable conversations and negotiations I have lately are with my toddler, so I'm not doing so well. And she seems to win everyone. But maybe this will help me going forward.
Thank you all so much. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. So before diving into discussion about difficult conversations and conflict resolutions, we're going to go ahead and take it back a step by answering what are some things that you can do to help build rapport in the beginning of a new group or team coming together before we get to these type of difficult conversations.
So I'll kick it off, right? So it's like the buzzer. We need a buzzer now. So if you want to call on us individual, otherwise it'll be who gets to it. But yeah, so that question, and I think we have our audience participants are mostly students. Is that correct, or is it, because I think it's not an open thing. So yeah, I mean, in terms of their relevance, the answer to that, really, the specifics depend on what is the size of the team, right? Because your tactics and your strategy for leading a team that is 5-person, 5 different people versus 50 people versus 500 people are all different. But probably the most relevant thing is going to be for for our student population to think about these smaller teams. But I will say there is commonality between all of those, and the foundation for everything is basically staying engaged and inclusive with your team, clear and consistent communication, and transparency. And if you have those things, then you're good. So how you build rapport, I mean, there's a lot of details and whatnot. So yeah.
Thanks. Let's go to Tichelle.
You know, I have something to say about everything. So I'll always let someone else talk first because I'm going to go on and on. Yeah, so my approach is, just keeping it as real as possible, right? I think that one of the things that most of what most of us have experienced is that employees are tired of the BS, right? So they really just want someone that's going to be honest. And so building a rapport is basically setting a space that lets both the employee know what your expectations are of them, and then what they can expect from you in return, right? Like your leadership style. My approach is very direct, but it's also very approachable, right? So you can come in here and tell me a silly joke, but that does not mean I'm not going to ask for that report that's due at noon, right? And so just making sure that those guidelines are really set, and encouraging the team dynamic. I think that that's important as well, is making sure that the way that they see you interacting with them, it's consistent with the way that you interact with the rest of the team as well.
Mm-hmm.
Rick?
I think I've had success with teams in the past with 2 sort of different sets of activities. But the bottom line is to find common ground. And so the 2 activities are community service, volunteerism, and strategic planning, which I'll say is maybe in the broadest sense of the word. So even if you're not in a position where you actually need a strategic plan, as one might be thinking in your mind what a strategic plan is, doing something with the team around what the team does to say, what are we all trying to accomplish? And that common ground then is maybe the goals that the team has. And so regardless of the different backgrounds we have, or the different personalities, or, I've got 8 kids, you've got 2 kids, I grew up in Las Vegas, you grew up in Nebraska, I like football, you like, TV. We're going to have all those differences, but if we can find common ground around what we're trying to accomplish as a team in our own work, or in the community case by helping others, that seems to break the ice quite well for me.
Thanks, Rick. Casey?
All right, and I'm going to go off kind of what Rick was just saying is, yes, at the beginning, what you want to do is build that relationship. The more that you can trust and build the bond between people, the better your coworkers are going to work, and the relationship and the mutual trust is all starting. So I personally think that that's important, but it can also start, I love the idea of doing some service, but maybe it's something fun and just kind of a silly game, or, what's your favorite this or that? Because I think sometimes when people come together in a group, they are timid and they don't want to say something silly or embarrass themselves. And so kind of an icebreaker. I mean, everybody's new. And so just getting to know that, hey, you know, Casey loves peanut butter. And so now the next time they're together and somebody sees peanut butter, there's just a mutual, there's a mutual commonality, and just building the trust, because then when you see the person, it's like, oh yeah, Rick, remember when we did that, you know, community service. And so just building bonds and relationships are crucial. And like Rick said, it doesn't matter where you're from, everybody has something in common. So it's kind of just finding the common ground.
Thank you all. I hear a lot about building relationships from the beginning by being honest and having some clear and consistent communication, and always being transparent to set kind of the stage for the future. So in your experience, what are some best practices for initiating a difficult conversation in the workplace? I'll hand it over to Casey first.
Right away, when you say that, I think of I statements. Whatever you're about to say, you don't want to go into a conversation, whether you think or you are correct in whatever right or way, use I statements, going with that sincere meaning and that care, and just say, you know, I feel that I was overlooked, or I feel that I got mistreated. And so to me, just kind of, you know, really just expressing your feelings without attacking somebody else is really important, because once you start attacking and pointing the fingers, people are already being defensive. So speak from the heart and say your feelings without putting words in other people's mouths.
Do you want to add anything, Lisa?
Yes, please. So if for everyone who's listening, if you have not done Crucial Conversations training, go and do it. Go look that up, or I'll put it in the chat when I'm done. Do it, because it will give you a really great way, a place to start and a path to go down. So there's two different things. You know, it depends on if you are having a one-on-one conversation, or you know that there's going to be a difficult conversation and it's a group of people. So in a one-on-one, and I literally just did this 3 days ago, in a one-on-one conversation, if you are, you know, anticipating something, you know, set the tone, set the stage, right? Set it with a good intention, making sure that, hey, you know, we're gonna have a conversation, but hey, I'm on your side. I'm rooting for you. I'm doing this to support you. I'm doing this. We're gonna have a conversation that is gonna have an outcome that is intended to be a positive outcome, right? So we're gonna do this together. You know, being sure, communicating that you're on that person's side, right? That you are literally there to be that advocate, even if, you know, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. If it's a group, one of the things that I like to do for a group is start with a set of guiding principles. So whatever it is in terms of the conversation, whatever we're going to accomplish, the task at hand, I'll go to a board and write down a set of guiding principles that we can all agree on. You know, if we are going toward a common goal, you know, we're doing something like, we want to support early career staff, you know, whatever it is, you know, have something that's a set of principles. And that way, if things get, you know, heated or difficult, you go back to that principle. It takes it away from being personal, and you can point to that and say, we agreed on these guiding principles? Are we doing this one, right? And so it takes people back into that mode of trying to do something that they're not just fighting with each other as people.
Rick?
I think making sure it's conversations are based on a, I think what Lisa said, you're on the same side, and that you're trying to get to a resolution, and before you get to a resolution, you have to have a fact set. And facts in this case do include feelings. In other words, how you feel is a fact, or how I feel, how the two people feel are facts. And so making sure those are on the table, and making sure that you can get to a factual basis for what you're trying to accomplish is really important, because I think otherwise you might have the difficult conversation. You might think one person might think they've resolved it, but they leave the room and the other person didn't actually hear the message, because it wasn't fact-based and it was no agreement to the facts through the conversation. So I think that's really critical in these situations.
Thank you. Tashelle?
So I agree a lot with Rick. So I think that the most effective, or at least my approach, is start with the goal in mind, right? So this is what we are going to accomplish. This is what we are setting out to do within this conversation. I think it's very important to acknowledge that in business, we have uncomfortable conversations. It's just kind of the way that it is. I'm sure Rick has uncomfortable conversations with his toddler. Uncomfortable conversations take place, right? My niece tricks me into things all the time, and I'm like too embarrassed to admit that this 5-year-old just hustled me, but it happens. But so in terms of having these conversations, right, it's about acknowledging that there's a goal in mind. So the goal is we want to solve a problem. And so we present the problem and we present the solution, and then we address how the current situation is contributing more to the problem than the solution. And we're going to come to an agreement today. And this is how we're going to do it. But also, I want to add, as Rick said, that it has to be fact-based. I think one of the biggest mistakes is going in and you're irritated or you're emotional, or this has cost me time, this has cost me money, etc. And so the approach is wrong. And so basing it completely on fact and solving that problem is key to that being a successful, uncomfortable conversation.
Thank you. So staying kind of on the topic of initiating a conversation, do you all think it's important to declare the reason you want to engage in a specific conversation with the person beforehand, or do you think you just initiate the conversation? What are your thoughts on that? Pass it back to Tashelle.
I don't I have a habit of not explaining myself. And yeah, I mean, the reality is we have a problem that needs to be addressed. So if we have something to discuss, that means that there's something that needs to be resolved. And I don't think that needs any explanation. But I think that also goes back to setting expectations, right? So when your team knows how you operate, when your team knows what the expectations are, the expectations of why we're having a conversation become unnecessary.
Thank you. Casey, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it could go either way depending on the situation of why you're talking to that person and what your role is. But I do agree in the sense of, if expectations are set beforehand, then there shouldn't be like a pre-explanation, and with open dialogue, then it shouldn't be a problem anyways. Like going back to our last question, we're talking about facts and what's the way it is. And so I think sometimes when you give people too much of a heads up, then they're playing head games with themselves, and then a lot of emotions are getting involved instead of like, hey, let's talk with the discussion. So I've been on both sides of it. So I personally think it's better to just go in with it, just dive in and have the talk.
Thank you. Rick?
I guess I'll echo that the concept that there should be no surprises. I think there's obviously a lot of different types of situations, so we can't cover them all, I suppose. And there's specific ones that might have, legal or other, policy issues and all that sort of stuff. That I'll just take like what I consider a more normalized situation, which is just, performance in some form is not meeting what we want. That again shouldn't be a surprise, because we should know what we're trying to accomplish. We should know the metrics we're trying to manage. So if you think of like a team leader, and the team has metrics and the team is not performing, and you want that leader to, you want to know from that leader what the plan is to fix it and be accountable for it. You can do that in your normal weekly update with that person. Then the monthly report would have already gone out and they could see it. Like, And you could send out an agenda in advance that says topic number 3 is, ongoing team performance and leaders accountability. And like, okay, so they know the agenda item but they should have already been prepared because that's their job, is to get the team to perform. So you having the conversation with them, it's almost like, I think we're trying to say a difficult conversation in some ways shouldn't be difficult, right? Of course it is, but I guess the point is, if you know the expectations and you're prepared going, sort of for that, then hopefully it's not a surprise anyway.
Any additional thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah, I wanted to just say, I was thinking back over the history of, the many, many difficult conversations. And one of the things that back in the before time, if I wanted to de-escalate something or address something before it became a big problem, I would just walk over to somebody's office, right? I would do the thing like Sichelle said, which is, just casual, right? Because if you set a formal meeting, that already comes with a tone and an expectation of something that might be serious. And if you want to set a tone, then it's, hey, let's just have a chat about this, even though it is potentially a serious topic. You could do that, but today, we're not quite there yet, right? Where we can have casual contact like that. So things tend to be a little more formal and organized. And so at that point, I would say, for all my formal meetings and literally everything that's a virtual meeting, people know what the topic is. So there's not really a way to kind of do that technique, but something to keep in your mind when you get to actually go back and work, if you get to have an in-person workplace environment. The other thing I wanted to say that is related to this is don't wait. I think that's a really important component of approaching the conversation, is really that time element, because if you push it out, then it can become larger in somebody's mind than it really is. So you want to just do it quickly. Don't let it wait. Also, because it can grow into a bigger problem the longer that you wait. So don't do that, is also very important.
Thank you. I want to go back to something that Rick had just mentioned about, it shouldn't be so difficult. So, and I know you've already all started to touch on this with talking about, keep it fact-based, but is there a way to make a difficult conversation not so difficult? Any tips or strategies that you might all have? I'll hand it over to Tashelle first.
Thank you, Nev. So I think it's important to acknowledge that what might be difficult for Tashelle is not necessarily difficult for Lisa. And so, and I don't say that casually, right? You're laughing, Lisa, but it's very true. So I think we approach these conversations with this assumption that it's going to be incredibly difficult, or that this person may not be able to handle it, or they're going to blow their top, or something along those lines. And so it's really important that we get out of our own head and think about what, again, the goal that we're trying to accomplish. So I've had a lot of success with having very uncomfortable conversations, because again, I'm not bringing emotion into it, and I'm allowing this person to have a very natural response. So if they are uncomfortable, I allow them to be uncomfortable. Do you need a minute? I'll walk away and give you a second to reflect. But the conversation has to take place. And I think it's about just applying that human side to it as well, right? And acknowledging that what's necessary, right, is the conversation. What's necessary is the solution, that we solve the problem. And that does not necessarily need to be difficult. So we need to get out of our head a lot in assuming that that's going to be the case. I've gone into many conversations thinking like, okay, this is going to be, and it totally wasn't, right? The person was like, I expected this to happen. I actually was looking forward to this conversation, so on and so forth. And it cleared the air and it was a lot easier. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Rick, you want to add anything?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Tashelle said there. I think I can reflect on conversations where going in I thought it'd be difficult, and to the point, it was actually well received. I think the key, certainly had others where it wasn't the case. So I think in sort of all cases, I think one of the keys is to be prepared for sure. And part of that preparation to me is be very clear about what you're trying to get accomplished first in terms of what you want to get across. And again, I'll go back to that, should be largely fact-based, but nothing worse for probably any conversation than sort of a winding road of setup and then, sort of the punchline, right? I have I'm on a board, it's maybe feel like a non sequitur, but I'm on a not-for-profit board where the CEO, the head of the organization, from the staff perspective, is former military, and he has a term that I just hadn't heard before. When he starts an email or a message to us, it says BLUF, BLUF, and then has a sentence on it, and the BLUF stands for bottom line up front. Bottom line up front, you need to be aware of this issue we're having. And then there's 4 paragraphs, right? Or bottom line, we're getting a big grant. This is awesome news. And then there's 4 paragraphs. Or bottom line, I just had to fire someone. Then there's 4 paragraphs. And so no one likes a conversation where you got to get through the 4 paragraphs and go, oh, I'm fired, or whatever the difficult conversation's about. And so I think being prepared and what is it you want to really get across quickly is good in all cases. Because the one I can reflect on where it was a positive was I did that approach. I was worried about what the reactions would be. I said it. They said, "Oh my God, it's the greatest news ever." Well, that just saved me a lot of paragraphs of the discussion points. So I think getting the key thoughts out quickly and in a well-prepared design manner is really important.
Thank you. Lisa?
Oh, absolutely, Tashelle and Rick. Those are, yeah, I would say yes, yes, yes. I always feel awkward is for other people. So, but that's just a Lisa thing, right? That's my mantra, but in reality, your ability to lead and navigate a difficult or awkward conversation, a conversation you're worried about, that you have some anxiety about, your ability to do that successfully is going to be a direct indicator of whether or not you will want to or would be good at leadership roles. So that may not be something that you want to do, but your ability to do it is really critical for your ability to be a leader. The only I get the the TLDR. That's the ones I get. I can't write a 4 paragraph email, so everyone is spared from that. The only other thing is in terms of, I always go in prepared that somebody's going to be upset and unhappy, which is fine because nobody likes bad news. Sometimes they're not, sometimes they are. The worst ones, one of the reasons that I think it's valuable to prepare for, for this sort of outcome that's negative, is that, it's not uncommon that you will go through a conversation or a meeting, you think you're in a good place, the person tells you that everything is fine, is it okay? And they're not fine. And they go off and actually do something else that is completely contrary to what they have just told you to your face. So even if, sometimes you can trust that no, things are good, but, not always. So that's kind of like double graduate level navigating difficult conversations, because that's like the aftermath. But sometimes conversations, they just never end.
Thanks, Lisa. Casey?
Well, the last thing I will add, and we mentioned this, I think 1 or 2 questions ago, but right up front, setting your expectations. Because when people know what your expectations are, I mean, as a parent in the classroom, I'm my son's soccer coach, whatever the expectations are, if you're expected to be at work on time, then you show up on time. So then if they're late and you're having a discussion, you can start off that by saying, remember that I expect my team, my family, my coworkers to show up on time. Well, I'm noticing. And so by you reinstating what your expectations are, it just reinforces everything that you're saying. Being in the classroom, the first week as a teacher is crucial. If you let those kids walk all over you, it's going to be a really tough semester. But if you kind of lay the rules, like these are my expectations, then if somebody is on their phone FaceTime, you say, hey, no phones in class. Remember what I said? But it's just going back to what you set up for them. You know, it could be Rick arguing with his toddler who wants something as they're checking out in the grocery store, but Rick said no candy. It's like, you just got to kind of stick with it. So to me, setting the expectations first, because then it makes, even if it is a difficult conversation, it makes it easier because you're coming back to what you initially said. So really no too big of surprises.
Thank you. So this next question is kind of more team-based when you're in a group or on a team. Obviously, sometimes you're just not all going to agree on a specific thing. So can we talk a little bit about the art of coming to a compromise? Kind of how do you find a middle ground? How do you get everyone to agree, even though they might not all agree, but kind of agree on the decision that was made and how you're going to move forward? I'll pass this on to Lisa first.
So, you know, that question is really from the standpoint of you're the team leader, right? And not, it's assuming, the way that question is structured is it's assuming you're the team leader and you're not one of the individuals. You know, there's some, you may or may not want compromise. I mean, compromise is kind of a loaded word. You may just want concurrence or, you know, agreement, you know, that this is what we're going to do. So it really depends on, and this goes back to what my companion panelists have said earlier, you know, agreeing on goals, agreeing on, you know, principles, agreeing on things. And there is a moment where, you know, you as the leader have to take all of that stuff and you really have to create a synthesis and not necessarily compromise. And so that means that not everybody is going to be 100% happy with what you have decided. But if you are good at your job of leading a team, you will consider everything and you will be able to create something that is more than the sum of its parts. One of the things I always tell people is I never want to be the smartest person in the room, because if I am that smart person, then I should be doing that other person's job. So I depend on a team of experts and really, really smart people to provide me with that information. But those very special cats hardly ever agree on anything. So I take all of that information and I put it together in something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that's what you end up doing a lot of the time as a leader of a team.
Thank you. Rick, do you want to add anything?
There's a lot of great articles and studies and books on two topics I think are really relevant here. One is how to run a meeting, and two is sort of decision making in a team. And so without trying to chapter and verse those, I'd say things like having a structure to meetings is really important. And meetings in the context of this is meetings where, you know, we're having a meeting to hopefully make a decision, or at least get all the input needed to make a decision or something like that. And then who gets to make the decision and who, you know, how is that decision made, right? So some decisions lend themselves to being delegated to one person in the team. Some are a great sort of majority vote type model, and some are, hey, this is all great input, but I'm the leader. You know, there's a decision I need to make. And then how is the sort of input taken? How is the communication happening through the process, and then how is it delivered? All really important to have a structure around that, so that we go back to the not surprised sort of thing. You know, don't take a vote if that's not what's going to decide the matter, right? Okay, we all said 8-6, but I'm going to say it's this other thing. that doesn't work. Like, shouldn't have taken a vote. You know, make sure you can articulate the rationale for the decision, and make sure you've done those other things we talked about, that before that one instance, you've been building the team to say, these are our goals, right? Everyone agrees with that? Okay, we know there's different ways to get to our goals. This is the way we're going to get to our goal in this situation. We're not all going to agree to that tactic, but we're all going to get around, you know, rally around it. We know that the input was taken and received and contemplated. We can tell that because of the dialogue we're having. Those things are all, you know, they seem intangible, but there's a lot of good process you can put behind that to make sure that comes out well, through, you know, so that decisions aren't surprises and that they're accepted, if you will, or embraced, and then the old, you've had your piece, now let's all rally around, this is what we're going to do and go do it. So I think the structure is important there.
Thank you. Casey?
All right. Well, when I hear the word compromise, I think you win some, you lose some. And with that being said, first off, you can't please everyone. That's just the way it is. And my mind instantly goes to, if I'm in a meeting and we're trying to come up with someone, is I love the good old T-chart. What are the pros? What are the cons? What's your opinion? And kind of working along to it. Rick, I agree. Don't ask for a vote if you're not going to use a vote, and don't ask questions that you're not going to further go with. But, getting everybody's input is important. And you have to agree, like that, agree in the sense that some people aren't going to like it and some people are. And so agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, whatever is decided, get over it. And we now all have to work towards a common goal.
Thanks, Casey. And Tashelle?
So I think that the most effective way to address this is by just, again, coming out and asking, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? But more importantly, one of the things that has been really effective for me is making everyone accountable, right? And so we're all going to have those disagreements. It could be over the company's going to order lunch and I want sushi and Lisa wants Thai food, and we're holding everybody up, right? Someone has to actually make a decision. But when we're talking about what's in the best interest of the company, we may have to ask that question, which is this your personal feeling or is this in the best interest of the company, right? And so I think just by simplifying it down to that when necessary can help move that ball along a lot further. And right, the team knows it's some of those arguments they're going to win, some of them they're not. But at the end of the day, if that expectation again has been set that we're doing what's in the best interest of our client, we're doing what's in the best interest of our company, et cetera, then it does make it a lot easier to just kind of move that ball forward.
Can I just add, I'll give you an example of compromise that doesn't work, maybe to Casey's point. And I'll use it in the context of when I mentioned like strategic planning type of things. Companies or teams often go through exercises where they might create a mission statement or values, right, for themselves. And you'll know if you see a mission statement that's like 4 sentences long, or hey, we have 10 core values, then the team just basically said, I don't want to tell anyone no, so I'm just going to take all their values and lump them on a piece of paper. Or I got it down to 3 values, but if you read the sentences, they're actually 18 values stuffed into 3. So I just didn't want to make anyone mad in the meeting. And that's great. That day, everyone seems happy. But what we all know is they're not going to be happy for the rest of the time because no one can try to achieve 10 core values and no one actually knows what we're trying to say anyway, and that sort of thing, right? So I guess my point is short-term gain, what feels like a good outcome is usually not a good outcome for the long term. It's better to resolve the issue and take short-term pain for long-term gain.
Thank you for adding that. So I heard a few of you mention that it's really important to take the input of your team members, but then ultimately you're taking this input and making the executive decision that's aligning with those goals that you established from the beginning. Have you ever been in a situation where you kind of had to handle conflict when you had to make a final decision because there was a fast approaching deadline or there was no time for debate or input? How was the outcome? Did you have any kind of pushback or just kind of how you handled that situation? I'll hand that over to Lisa.
That's kind of all the time in a way. I mean, it's I will say I haven't had really tense conflict of the crucial conversations level, but that's 100% the way that my center runs. I have a leadership team of experts whose opinion is incredibly valuable. We debate here and there, but at the end of the day, their role is advisory to me, and I'm the one that has to make the final decision, because I am 100%, and this is a note for everyone here to really understand how your organization works in terms of what roles and authorities different people have, because many times people think that they have frustration because they think they have an authority in a role that they don't have, or vice versa, all of those kinds of things. So there is a constant set of cyclical deadlines in terms of program elements within my centers, reviewing proposals. We have to make constant decisions. And these often have a really quick turnaround time because we're supposed to be an agile organization. And so, ultimately, yeah, I mean, people have disagreed, and I've said, yes, I hear you. I think that's important. Here is my decision, and this is why I have decided to go this way. And it's totally fine. I think people, my team, I think that is one of the things that I find really useful, is that they are comfortable disagreeing with me. And so, and I welcome that, and I want to hear that, because I will change my mind, with new information. If something changes, if there's something new, I have been known to change my mind. So I appreciate that level of advocacy, but it is ultimately my decision at the end of the day, and I have to decide what is more important, in all the information that I have, and how does that fit into a larger picture.
Does anyone else want to add to that? Casey?
Yeah, no matter how much time you have to make a decision, sometimes it's better for the fast ones, because we are all in a role because of how we do it or who we are. And so if I need to make a fast decision, I'm not going to sit there and play games in my head. They hired me because of who I am, and so be confident with yourself and go with it. And so that could also be, I've coached sports lots of years in my life. So, going with the coach, making a call, a specific play, you can't sit there and debate that. There's a reason why you're the coach. You're the coach to make the call. You're the boss because they chose you to be in charge and make these decisions. So I think sometimes we have to get out of our own way and remember that we are adults, and it's okay to just go and make a decision because that's what you feel is right. But to add with what Lisa said, believe me, not everything I've said or done is correct. And so it's okay that even if I go forward and I do something, I am the first that will open up and say, hey, you guys, I moved forward with this. It wasn't the right direction, or I gave wrong advice. But sometimes you got to do it. That's why we're adults, and you got to own up and step up.
Thank you, Casey. Tashelle or Rick, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that it's important to acknowledge that exactly what Casey said. Sometimes you have to make a decision, right? And that has to be done. It's also important to acknowledge that sometimes that might create hurt feelings, or that might create insecurities amongst your team members, right? Your employees. And so it's important to acknowledge, both with diplomacy and, again, authority, that decision needed to be made. I appreciate your input. Give, hey, validate, appreciate how much you care about the company, et cetera, et cetera. But this was in the best interest of the company. Give your position, and then you move forward. But I do think it's important to acknowledge if an employee comes to you and is upset, or does feel disappointed, or feels slighted, because you don't want that employee to now start holding back. You don't want that person to now start to not contribute or show up for you when you really need them. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a responsibility to make the decision as the leader, but then also as the leader, you also need to make sure that your employees are okay.
Yeah, and I think one thing that strikes me about how you set the question up was even reflecting on how you interpreted what we said. I think you were right in interpreting it that way, but I think maybe another way to say this is to remind everyone that there's a 360 view here. So there are decisions where we take input and then we have to make a decision. As I mentioned, there's other types of decisions, right? And I think one of the things you can do to build a lot of team rapport is make sure that those things actually occur. So there are times when, as I mentioned, you might delegate the decision to someone on the team because it's their area, and acknowledging like, well, I might not have done it that way, but this is the way we're going to do it because it's your area, and everyone's got to know that that's the way we're going to do it. And then the team seeing you accept that, if you will, over time, right? The team seeing you make decisions under a timeline, but then you communicating afterwards, hey, I had to make that decision. Here's why I made that decision. Here's the ramifications of that decision for us going forward as a team. Here's what we'll look to do to plan ahead next time. All those sorts of things add up to a good team dynamic that allows those things to happen and not be, sort of questioned or there's an assumption that you get to build an assumption of positive intent through that history with the team. And so I think that's the kind of thing that I think is important. Again, the humbleness of a leader to say, look, this isn't, again, take that majority vote one. Hey, I voted differently. I voted in the minority, but we're gonna follow the majority here because that's what we said this decision was going to be made by. And you'll see me out in front being the biggest cheerleader for that decision. That sets a tone, right? That's how this team's going to act. And so if the people see the leader doing that, they're like, okay, I can do that. And so it's those moments that build the sort of build up the bank account of trust that allow you to be able to execute when you do need to those other decisions where you don't go with the group's input. You explain why you had to make a quick decision. You explain, what the situation was afterwards. That adds up to a lot of trust with the team.
Thank you, Rick. So how do we know if a difficult conversation is productive, and how can we refocus a conversation that has strayed from the topic at hand when this happens? I'll pass it over to Casey.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I just go back to those expectations and, like Tashelle said, like have your list on the board. This is what we're talking about. And then also at the end, restate or summarize what it is you are getting across. Or if you're unsure if the person is understanding you, say, hey, Lisa, can you summarize what you feel you heard from me and see what that person says? But again, it's all about the expectations. Like if it is an uncomfortable conversation, people might try to get away from it. So just coming back and being like, hey, remember I brought you in here to talk about this, and just, expectations.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that?
I do. So, yeah, I know, shocker, right, Lisa? I want to talk more. One list, right? Have those goals and then be prepared to lead that conversation, right? There's definitely going to be some of that winding road attempt, and make sure that you are incredibly engaged and fully aware of where the conversation is going, and make sure that you're steering it so that it's on track. There's nothing worse than someone in a position of being uncomfortable or being called to the carpet on something that is just simply caught off guard, right? Or not wanting to have that conversation. And it's a natural reaction to want to steer that conversation in a place that makes them feel more comfortable. So having those bullet points, being fully engaged, and make sure that you're driving that conversation.
Yeah, I in the conversation I just had a few days ago, I had to do that several times where, and you may want to do, I recommend two things for you: role play difficult conversations. The more you practice, the easier it gets. And give yourself, if you're just starting out, give yourself a handy set of lines, like a little script that you can refer to that will be able to draw somebody back. Like, for example, also having a timeline, right? If you only have an hour, you set that up right there. And one of the things that I did was I said at least one time, if not more, to this particular person, which is, I hear you, I want to give you a chance to speak, but I want to respect everybody's time because we need to walk ourselves through this timeline of decision process. But we'll leave some time at the end of this meeting for you to say what you need to say, right? So, because often when you're in a conversation with someone, and here's another like dark side of management. There are a lot of times where we want someone to feel heard, to be able to give it a chance to speak, but what they're saying isn't going to make a difference in terms of the structure of the organization and what's important to their leadership and management, because it's just not, it's sort of yes, I'm sorry you're frustrated with this, I'm sorry you feel this way, but no, we can't do this type of contract. This is just not a thing. I'm just throwing out a random example. There are things that you structurally just cannot do, or, in our case, in a national lab, takes an act of Congress. So, there's frustration, but there's also, yeah, I hear you, and then we have to move on. So, make sure I liked, like Tishelle said, make sure you have your agenda, make sure you have a plan. Sometimes it's worth it to have a pre-meeting meeting if you're going to go into it with a group or someone who you're going to have this difficult conversation, and you have to have more than one. Like, it's worth it to jump on and have a quick discussion so everybody's on the same page and you know exactly how the thing is going to go.
So we've talked a lot about difficult conversations from the perspective of us being in the seat where we're engaging in those conversations and we're the ones initiating them. But can we shift a little bit to how about how to handle it when we're the focus of a difficult conversations? How can we be more receptive to receiving these conversations or accepting critiques? I'll hand it over to Tishelle first.
That literally, I am perfection on earth. That does not happen. I am flawless. No, you know what? I truly value diversity of thought, right? And so while I think it's fun to be very direct or not necessarily fun, that's just who I am, right? Very direct, very to the point. I do not ever want to offend or make someone uncomfortable. So I do appreciate when someone calls me out on something I may have said or done or not done to make another person feel like they weren't valued, seen, respected, etc. I think that as leaders, that's a responsibility, right? Like that, I actually have that responsibility to my team to have that door open and hear them out. I'm also wise enough to recognize the difference between when an employee is trying to use my strong position as a way of getting out of being reprimanded or whatever the case may be. But I think that as a leader, right, it's something that we can't shy away from. We can't necessarily hold our team to expectations that we're not willing to be held to as well. I also think that it's important to have a circle, right, of other entrepreneurs, of other leaders that will hold you accountable and check you as well.
Rick, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think in sort of all situations, wherever you are in the sort of 360 of the people around you in a given, whether it's in a team environment or, for me, for example, with clients that we serve as a firm, always seeking feedback or seeking feedback, I guess, as often as sort of possible and on a regular structural basis is really important. Because again, one, that means the conversations that you have will be incrementally less difficult. It goes back to what I think Lisa said, like, don't let it linger. So if you're always seeking and getting feedback, then everyone will know where they stand better than they would have otherwise. And the number one thing I always think about is to say thank you and don't try to sort of make excuses about it, whatever it is. That doesn't mean you have to sort of sit there and accept it. It means that you want it to be productive and the person is at some level giving you something valuable. So you say thank you. And then, you work from there. You just sort of start there and then work through it. Likely, if it's a difficult conversation, the other one thing I'll say is no matter how that interaction ends, try to make sure you remember to to ask the ability to have another conversation or have other conversations about the topic, because you'll likely think of something afterwards that's relevant for this, and you don't want this to be the last word. Like, well, here's the 2 things I can think of, and then you think of 3 others later, and that sort of thing. So the ability to say, look, I'd like to think about this, I'd like to reflect on it, I'd like to put together a plan if there's something that needs to be solved or whatever it is, think about having a follow-up so that you don't have to do everything in the moment, because again, it could be emotional, could just not think of something, etc. But I always start with sort of make sure it's structural, that you're asking for feedback, and say thank you.
Casey, did you want to add something?
I do, because I'm that person. I walk out of a conversation and I'm driving home or I'm sitting in bed at night and I'm like, oh, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? Why didn't I ask this? And so I love that advice, and I do that too, Rick, as I say, can I follow up with you on this? First, when you first ask this question, first thing that comes to my mind is think before you speak. Sometimes when these difficult conversations come to us, it might be a surprise to me. I mean, I've had a conversation where a boss brought me in and all of a sudden I'm like, why? I didn't even know that, like, and so then I realized, okay, I need to listen. I need to listen and not let my emotions get the best of me. And so I think just back to that rule of thumb of think before you speak. And then even if you write down a question or say something, and then yes, go back and just say, I appreciate you talking to me about this, but can I have some time to, or can I have a follow-up? Because difficult conversations can get our emotions and can get the best of us. And so think before you speak.
Thank you. And Lisa?
I definitely have the view that as someone gave me this pithy quote, feedback is a gift. Although, because sometimes it's really hard. I don't know. I find it really difficult to get honest feedback from people because nobody else wants to have that conversation, I guess. But at the same time, it is difficult to take feedback, especially, well, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. It depends. I had a leadership coach who put it in a really great way, which is that feeling that we get where we get really defensive and angry when we get negative feedback. It's, how dare you give me that feedback, because I already know how awful and terrible I am. You cannot tell me anything that I don't already know about myself, because I'm my own worst critic, right? That's what a lot of high performance people are. But so his technique was, when you get to that point, take notes. Just start taking notes. Just saying, yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to take that, and then take it away and go think about it. And then, come back when you're in a better frame of mind. And so, and that's one thing, but I'm also going to say for all of you who are, on this, there is a version of getting feedback where someone is doing something wrong to you. You recognize that either I'm being bullied here, I'm being harassed, this situation is bad. Been on that recently too. And at that point, you really need to enlist somebody else to come with you. You need to confide in someone. You need to tell somebody else that you trust, that will be your advocate about the situation, and get someone else who is in leadership, preferably above you, to come with you and to advocate and to really explore more of that situation. So don't feel like, if you feel you're being unfairly judged, if you feel like you are getting feedback that is just not correct, then definitely explore that. I mean, you need to do it in a firm and polite and professional way, but you shouldn't have to take that either. That's positive self-advocacy.
Thank you. I have so many more questions I could ask you all, but we're out of time for today. So before we end today's session, I just want to give a huge shout out to our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, your experiences with us. Thank you to our participants for joining us today. Before you all log off, if you don't mind, please taking a few minutes to fill out this feedback survey for us. It helps us as we are planning our future workshops. So we would appreciate that. I'm going to just drop it in the chat here for you. So thank you all so much again. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.